Good morning, or indeed afternoon. I would like to thank you all for bearing with me while I swoop in via this medium, and extend a huge thank you to Kevin for allowing me to do this when I realized I wasn't going to be able to make it in person, and for setting up the text. Thank you, Kevin. This talk is called Ritual and Revelation, and it is rather different from any presentation I've given at a conference so far. Like my chapter in the upcoming or newly published Transdate's book, it is not quite one thing or the other. In fact, this presentation is sort of a continuation of that chapter and refers to many of the same ideas. This presentation is a piece of self-analysis, bringing together my own experiences of the interplay between my academic research and my practical magical work. The category blurring, boundary crossing, meeting at the margins nature of the Transdate's conference has both motivated the content of this piece and indeed opened the door for such an approach. Like I said, this is something I really haven't done before. I presented as an academic at various academic conferences, and I've presented as a practitioner leading public rituals and lectures and hosting forums. So I'm used to putting on different hats for different audiences. But today I'm going to take off both the hats, both the mortarboard and the priestess's veil. I'm seeing in recent times a lot of practitioners move into academia, but it is still very rare for someone who is first and foremost an academic to talk about their practice publicly. But this is what I intend to do. Now, I recognize the many reasons for keeping these two voices or discourses distinct: academic research and personal revelation. However, in my life and in my mind and in my work, these two things are not distinct. They are an alternating current that fertilize one another, and my best work is always done at the convergence between research and practice. Now, I actually think that this is the case for almost everybody, that it is through dialectic that knowledge is formed, that it is through the dialectic of different kinds of knowledge that the knowledge economy is sustained. It's something built into the nature of knowledge construction itself and lies behind our categorizations of knowledge, yet it's something that we don't often talk about, so that's what I want to try and do. And this stuff is really difficult to discuss, of course it is. Incommunicability is one of the intrinsic qualities of gnosis. Something that was really interesting to me while I was trying to write this talk was how infantilized I felt. As I tried to write about something that I understand in a highly intuitive way, I felt scared. I felt as though articulating my practical work in a simple way, without the gaudy purple of mystical writing, might see it diminished in another's eyes. I felt fear of losing something special and sacred if I turned a microscope to my own personal experience of the divine. And I reflected and wondered to what extent these sort of feelings perpetuate a willful blindness within conversations and knowledge construction. So, I study Dion Fortune's novels. In particular, my PhD research focuses on the extent to which, and methods by which, Fortune's novels ought to be understood as initiatory. My favorite novel by Fortune is a book called the Goatfoot God. Written in 1936, it follows the tale of the rich dilettante Hugh in his quest to perform a black mass. He unites forces with an artist named Mona, and under the auspices of the adept Jelks, their black mass becomes an invocation of the great god Pan. Now, the main part of the book is this big temple building project, a sort of cross between Arabor's decadent retreat and the Egyptian temples described by Imblikos. But what fascinated me most in this text was the creation of a sort of astral double of this real-life temple, a magical technique Fortune calls composition of place. Drawn from the method of St. Ignatius, it involves creating a sort of astral temple built wholly from emotion. The meditations offered in Ignatius's spiritual exercises are not constructions of settings or mandalas or principles, but of feelings, emotions, and empathy. And this is what Fortune picks up on, combining it with Golden Dawn-inspired techniques for astral composition. She instructs the readers of her text on creating their own emotionally charged, imaginative scenes, which, when entered into, would immediately cause the subject to be hit by the full force of said emotion. When I came across this method, this technology, I was fascinated, both on an intellectual level and on a spiritual or imaginative one. This method became the focus both of my academic research into initiation and my personal work. At the same time as I was uncovering the hidden influences and implications that permeate the Goatfoot God, I was also creating my own temple, utilizing the techniques described therein. I created a little cave shrine with mossy, glittering walls and a red draped altar. The only feeling allowed in the shrine was absolute devotion. As I spent more and more time in the cave, I created new pieces. A door that led to a long corridor filled with phallic stalagmites. A great temple filled with revelers. And later, a deeper cave, home to dark pools. In fact, this practice, which began as a thought experiment, has over time come to define huge amounts of my magical practice, and I now use it in ways I never would have foreseen, and find in it new truths and techniques. As I practiced and played with this technology, and as my research into Fortune's aims and methods deepened, it began to dawn on me that Fortune had intended her readers to do the exact thing that I had been doing. Being inspired by the content of the book and running with it in my own direction, the power of fantasy, of what Fortune calls deliberately willed daydream. Because what we see in Fortune's novels is a dialectic of knowledge production between author and reader. An intertextuality that utilizes common experience and emotion as well as textual utterance. Fortune's real-life magical experiences, evil hypnotists, jealous witches, polarity magic, hauntings, possessions, vampires, mediumship, all of these go into this novel. And when one becomes more familiar with Fortune's life and the anecdotes described in Psychic Self-Defense, the extent to which this is done is clear. So her experiences, mediated through her imagination, fill the novel. Her intention was that the novel would fill the imagination of the reader, and the reader would go off and create their own experiences, in line with those described in the text. So this kind of initiatory daydream that Fortune was dealing in, it wasn't a stagnant thing. Within this mode of thought, a magical work both stems from gnosis and creates it. It is an alternating current, and anyone familiar with Fortune's work will know that this is one of her very favourite metaphors for polarity. And indeed, Fortune believes polarity applies to books as much as to sexual partners. It is this back and forth, this stimulus for production, this ferment that encourages readers to create and extend their own fantasies, that is the key to understanding how initiation worked within Fortune's textual schema. My whole PhD thesis thus aims to academically prove something that I know to be true because of Gnostic experience. I know that Fortune's works are initiatory because they initiated me. They were the spark to the ferment during my studies. The lessons they gave me on polarity led me to and through my magical relationships. The practical lessons they taught defined my own development. Their ethical program came to influence my own, and the magical techniques contained therein have become some of the defining practices of my own magical work. Now, I'd like to come at these ideas again from a different angle. Just before I really started delving the stuff I've been talking about above, I had some weird experiences. Experiences that I might call channeling. I always liked to write, and I've always suffered writer's block, and looking at it retrospectively, I can see quite a clear psychological explanation. I was inspired to write in a new way by the occult reading I was doing. But at the time, what I experienced this as was channeling, was receiving a text that did not originate from within me. Now, I'm using this word channeling because it's convenient. Everyone here kind of knows what it means. And I use that word myself privately, although not usually publicly. Because the thing is, I'm not really sure I believe in channeling. Or rather, channeling brings up some very interesting issues surrounding questions of words and subjectivity. What's really at stake when we talk about channeling is authority. To say, I channeled X is an authority claim. It is a performative denial of the single subjectivity of the channeling person. It's a form of authority through negation of the self. And this is the reason I've always been reluctant to publicly identify my writing as channeled. Which seems significant because after these channeling experiences, I began to feel something that I'd never really felt before. This absolute, overwhelming urge to communicate. Obviously, I'd wanted people to read my writing and I had dreams of being an author, but this was something else. This didn't care if it was one person or 100. It just knew that somebody needed to hear what I needed to say. And so I started writing mystical essays. And what's funny is that these were my coming out of the broom closet, but they were also only the very first stages of my own magical path. And so I suppose my coming out was inevitable. It didn't occur to me not to publish mystical theological essays, because on my Facebook, where all of my academic colleagues are, because I didn't see them as being separate from my academic work. It wasn't until I had shared this work and received feedback that I realized the faux pas I had committed, and I discovered the existence of a sort of invisible net of rules surrounding what it means to be an academic in esotericism. Now, as I developed my practice and technique of mystical writing, I encountered a new question. How is this revelation best to be shared? This, of course, is actually a very, very old question. How does one communicate the incommunicable? After a particularly intense round of experiences, I was left with this weird, dark poetry. And I didn't really write poetry before this, and I didn't really know what to do with it. But I knew that it contained within it something important, and I had this undeniable urge to share it. But I knew it couldn't just be laid out on a platter. It had to be shared in such a way so as to give others their own opportunity to experience, to understand. Now, the suggestibility of humans is often decried, but it is also a most potent sacred technology. The imagination is not something to be feared, but the organ by which we think the unthinkable, the very place of thoughts of God. I began my PhD research in September of 2017. I wrote Persephone's Mass, a group ritual constructed from this channeled poetry, that autumn too. I did the two pieces of work side by side. They were two products of one discovery, twin homunculi expressing one formula. In initiation, sex plus setting equals success. Amp up the atmosphere, get the polarities in circuit, and you're off. Having realized the importance of the imagining subject in textual initiation, having allowed my own imagining subjectivity to run wild as I combed the pages of Fortune's novels, I realized, if the site of textual initiation is the imagining subjectivity, the internal erotic landscape, then the how is aesthetic and eroticism. This discovery was both the key to unpacking my PhD thesis and the beginning of my ritual writing career. Now, you may have noticed through the course of this presentation that I've been showing you a series of images that seem largely unrelated to what I'm talking about. Well, I sort of wanted to show you all another way that I've used these same ideas of the initiatory power of aesthetic and eroticism applied with feeling over time in order to allow spiritual truths to ferment. So, Fortune talks a lot about the fact that occult truths can't just be given. And I always think it's very interesting that people reject Fortune for being sort of blathery and poetic, but that was her whole point. That if you lay down occult truths in one simple sentence, no one will understand it properly. But if you write a whole book that lovingly, with weird loops and series of repetitive motifs, shows you the workings of a truth, then you might have a chance. And that's exactly what Fortune's novels are supposed to do. And indeed, I've used somewhat of the same method in this presentation. Now, I run a Facebook page called Temple of Our Lady of the Abyss, and in it I post pictures that I find online and text. And the pictures will be anything from Babylon icons and occult art to turn-of-the-century Japanese prints of butterflies and contemporary surrealist collages, anything I like. And the text that is written with these images is sections from my current notebook, some notes or ideas or poems that I don't really know what I'm going to do with. So these images I've been showing you are all images I've posted in the past year on this temple page. And what's really interesting about this process is the way that people will approach me through the page, looking for more information on the mysteries in Babylon. And when I talk to these people, some of whom I know prior and some who are strangers, I hear the same story again and again. How seeing these images and reading their accompanying text, just one every few days, has compounded over time to cause a change in them, and now they're seeking to know more. That was never my intention with this work. I just post things on Facebook for the fun of curation. But it has proven to me the potency of this formula of aesthetic plus eroticism. And it has shown me that the ferment of initiation can come through any medium, even Facebook. This presentation has been a little bit all over the place, and this is because I've been trying to show the movement of knowledge escaping from categories. But you may well be sitting here at the end thinking, well, why does any of this matter? And my answer would be this. Because as long as we have a field that exists in two parts, we shall only ever have a partial understanding of the field. As long as the ideas of art and initiation, ritual and revelation have different definitions depending on which side of the objectivity line they come from, we'll never really understand the incredible, magical, life-changing initiatory faculties of the imagining subject. Thank you.
So thank you, Georgia, for your really interesting presentation. Are there any questions? I feel like some weird oracle. Your voice started speaking and people were kind of looking at me, but my lips weren't moving. So.
Oh, hi, Georgia. My name's Leanne. I'm in the group here. It's not a question, but it was a thank you, because that's one of the things that I grapple with all the time, and I appreciate your honesty and your courage in sharing this. That's all I really wanted to say. One of the questions is, what is the name of your blog? I lost it in the presentation. The name of your page, your Facebook page.
Could you hear that?
No.
Okay.
Oh,
so
okay.
You can hear me?
Good.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So someone wanted to thank you for your honesty and your courage, and to ask you for the name of your Facebook page or your blog, because you didn't hear it.
Temple of Our Lady of the Abyss.
Temple of Our Lady of the Abyss.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
I've got a question. Hello? I got signal? Am I in? Okay. I have a question for you, Georgia. Can you hear me?
Can you hear Kevin?
Just about.
I'll just come over here. Okay. Now you can hear me. You're in your discussion about the way that these two things inform each other and bleed into each other and so on and so forth, all of that's absolutely clear. Yet, even though your academic work does question the objectivity line, you still have two very distinct registers with regards to your mystical writing and your academic writing. And I wonder how much this coming out of the broom closet and the more obvious and open nature is related to the sort of collapse of the private and the public in relation to your relationship with social media, and that in a world where that wasn't the case, because of your very distinct registers and distinct writing styles, there may have been more separation. And could you speak around that in any way?
So that's a kind of interesting question. Somebody once compared, rather flatteringly, I think, my confusion between the academic and the mystic with Yeats. And I often consider what would have happened if I didn't have access to social media and I was publishing in, say, journals and such like. And of course, I think the whole experiment I've done with radical honesty and radical openness online wouldn't have really taken place in a different venue. With regard to the kind of collapse or otherwise of different styles, this is something that I'm deeply interested in, and my PhD supervisor keeps rather wagging a finger at me for being too mystic in my academic writing. But I think there's something to be said for attempting to collapse that in such a way that can do both at the same time. because I think there's something in the kind of very strong divide between the academic and mystic registers is precisely what I'm saying about things having a different definition depending on which arena they're taking place. And I feel like if I could write in such a way that managed to both be initiatory and mystic while being properly academic, I would have cracked something. But whether or not that's possible, I'm still working on.
Any other questions? Okay.
You mentioned the invisible set of rules around academics who work in esotericism. I think we've all experienced that. Do you or anyone else have any suggestions for what we can do about that? I don't know what the answer is, apart from trying to teach courses and to do research on a par with our colleagues, but it is a battle.
To me, it's the invisibility of the net that's the first problem, because how are we ever going to tackle it or change it if you don't find out it exists until you've got on the wrong side of it? And that's why, again, the radical honesty in academia, if we can be honest about the places that we have these kind of possible double standards or limitations, then we can begin to deal with them. But as long as it's something that's not discussed, it won't be able to be changed.
Okay.
I have a question. Didn't mean to ask. I was just curious, that fear that she described early on in the presentation, what she did to overcome that, to start to be more open. Does that make sense? Because I think for a lot of us, the initial fear,
Yeah.
I don't know, how do you want to ask?
How do you take the leap, right? Yeah.
Did you hear? So the question, you were speaking about the fear, and the question is how you overcame it, or what the process was. I'm probably asking a different question.
No, but with regards to the radical honesty. Yeah.
With the radical honesty, how did you overcome the fear with speaking out?
So this is a very interesting question, actually, because to me, and something I talk about a lot with my friends, is the way that I came to use radical honesty online as a kind of magical praxis. And the kind of, when I began writing when I got told a lot they were too personal, the things I was writing online, that it became a very effective way both of dredging up the things that I was uncomfortable talking about, so my own entrenched complexes, and those of everyone around me. So whenever somebody would get in touch and go, well, how dare you talk about this, or you really shouldn't talk about this in public, and then have the same person 2 weeks later go, you've really got me thinking about the way that happened in my own life. And I thought that was very interesting. And the second that began to happen, and people began to engage with me because of this radical honesty, then it kind of stopped being scary and just became really fascinating. And that was it. And now I can't stop myself.
Wonderful. Any other questions, comments? No?
I have one other follow-up. I wanted to know if that happened before she started writing the PhD, applying to enter into the PhD program, or if it happened after.
So what you've just described with the radical honesty, did it happen before your PhD program, or when did it happen?
That would have been in the same period as that I began my PhD work. So for me, the essay that I would say was the first truly radically honest essay in that sense was 6 months into my PhD research.
Okay. Well, thank you to all our speakers in this panel.